welcome. If you seek truth, the truth shall set you free. Fear not. And now the agenda with Crystal Risotti.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Agenda with Crystal Risotti. I'm your host, Crystal, and I want to welcome you to the show. Tonight we've got a good lineup. We're going to be talking about cosplay and conventions and furries, oh my. That's the name of tonight's show, and I want to talk to you about some risks around it. It can be a very fun topic, a very fun activity, a lot of things to do that can be fun, but there's also risks around it, as we know, in the current world we live in. So that's something that has been on my heart to share with parents, because I don't think a lot of parents are aware, or grandparents or aunts or uncles are aware of this type of subculture. And it's definitely having an impact on our generations of youth. And I think it's important to share with you what is going on in that space so that you can be on the watch for those types of risks that may be impacting your kids and grandkids. Last episode, we talked about some verses. These are actually the same verses that we used for the anime and manga show. So if you missed that one, go back and watch it, because it's kind of a precursor to this show. I'm just trying to build off of topics. And so that would be a good one to go back and watch. So let's start with Romans 12:2. The Bible says, "And be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." 2 Corinthians 10:3-5 says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringeth into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ." That's the main goal, isn't it? Keeping our minds pure and trying to have the mind of Christ. James 1:8 says, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Philippians 2:5 says, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus." We're basically commanded to try to work towards that, to have the mind of Jesus. Proverbs 23:7 says, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." So whatever we're feeding ourselves, whether it be in our minds, our hearts, we need to be careful with that, because it takes root, and then whatever you're thinking about and obsessing about and into, that's going to show in your actions. So we need to be very careful with guarding that as well. James 4:4 says, "Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God?" Enmity means opposition. "Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is an enemy of God." So why are we talking about some of these things? Because anything that we're exposed to in life can become an obsession, right? It can become a sort of God if we let it. We can put all of our effort into it. We can become interested in it and obsessed with it. It can become a God for us. And we want to be careful that we don't let anything go that direction, that we don't let something take over the place of our Lord and take over our lives, right? So it's tricky with cosplay and conventions and anime and manga, because I said it before, I'll say it again. Not all of it's bad. It's interesting stuff. It's fun stuff. It can be really fun to go to. I've been to a comiccon before. Love to go to Gen Con at some point and just kind of observe. But as with anything, there are also negative influences. And my concern is not for the adults. My concern is for the kids who are exposed to this and who get into it. I can tell you that I presented on anime and manga at an annual summit for a group. And after I presented, I was bombarded by people coming up to me, even in the bathroom, cornering me, asking me about anime and manga in particular, because their grandkids or their kids were showing signs of gender confusion, and they didn't know where it was coming from, but they know they're into this stuff. And they, like I was, were oblivious to it. it was comic books and cartoons and dressing up in costumes. And I never knew there was a risk around it. So again, my goal is to just present the risks. You as a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, whoever, you can then make the decisions and put the guardrails around your kids. But if you don't know there's risks, how can you do that? So again, I feel like that's my role, is to help educate people and inform people about what's out there in our culture so that you can be wise about it. So let's talk about cosplay. You're probably wondering, what's cosplay if you've never heard of it before? Cosplay is simply dressing up in costumes, and it stems from Japanese costume play in the 19th century. That's what it goes back to. It was actually costume drama. But nowadays, it's become basically like Halloween whenever throughout the year at these conventions and in groups, friend groups and acquaintance groups and meetups. It's basically people who like to dress up in the costumes of the characters that they follow in anime or manga or superhero type of costumes or things like that. So that's what that means. What's a con? When I talk about a con, Gen Con, Comic Con, they're just conventions for people that participate in that type of subculture, I call it still, because it is. And then we're going to talk a little bit about furries, and you've probably heard a lot about this in the news. Furries are just humanoid animals. That's what the definition really is. The group of furries is basically a subculture, again, who people like to dress up like animals, cartoonish animals usually. And sometimes it's a sexual fetish. It did start out that way. Now it's infiltrated into our youth. So they look at it like it's a fun escape. You know, if they're not in the sexual part of it, it's just a fun escape for them. So one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to come across in this exposure as all of it's bad and, you know, people can't participate in it and be Christians and, you know, it's horrible for people. It's not. But I do want to point out some of the risks. Like I said, I don't have enough time in the podcast to go into all of the risks, but I'm going to give you just some examples of what can happen and what is happening in the spaces. So let's go to slide 2. Slide 2 is just an example of some people that went to a convention. These are from a convention. They're cosplayers. The first one, really, there's a lot of dark imagery here, and that's the point of this one. I mean, the one in the bottom left corner is kind of funny to me. It's really cute. The one in the bottom right corner, I don't know what they're doing, but, you know, harmless. And, of course, I know the Joker because I, too, am into, like, Marvel and DC movies, and I'm not into anime and manga, but I am into like movies like the Avengers and stuff like that. I love action movies like that, and I love superhero movies. So I know that's the Joker, but I will admit I'm into it as an adult, okay? I like it as an adult, and I know the guardrails to put around that, right? But the imagery of the Joker is not good imagery if you look at it objectively. He is a villain, obviously, and I think that's okay to make a villain look crazy like that. But, you know, there's some darkness to it. The other pictures, though, the first one, the second one, they're a little dark, looking like a little bit of evil there. And then that third one on the top, it's not bad, but just look at it's like zombie eyes, you know. Again, that's not, I think you have to look at these things through the filter of, is it godly? Okay, we're supposed to look at it through the filter of, is it godly or not? I know we all, and I said this before on the last podcast, need entertainment. And I understand that completely, but I think we have to be better about not being so desensitized that we forget to look at these things through a filter of, is it godly? I think you can agree that a lot of those pictures are not godly. Let's go to slide 3. Here's some more. Here we have the Baphomet horns in the middle on the top. We've got some sexualization kind of stuff going on, like risque stuff on that top right. We've got, you know, just some, other crazy stuff going on. And again, some of them are just costumes. Some of them are fun. There's also that side that, like with everything, we have to be careful, right? And the thing is, let's look at slide 4. Your kids are seeing this if they're going to these conventions, if they're into cosplay, if they're into watching things about that on the internet. They're seeing this stuff. So you can't just think that the conventions are all cute characters and cartoon characters. They're not. And that's the point of this. There are very sexual undertones sometimes in the costumes, in the merch, all that stuff. Slide 5. This is an example of some of the risque stuff you're going to see, the sexualized stuff you're going to see at conventions. And then let's look at slide 6. This is another example of what you're going to see at a convention. This was at a con as well. So again, the point is this godly? I believe we have to temper ourselves with everything that we do. And I want to just let you know what the possibilities are that your kids are going to be seeing and be exposed to, as I said, to protect them. So I looked for some videos that I could show clips of the risque kind of stuff that you see. And honestly, I couldn't present any of it on this podcast. They were really bad, like really bad. And there were tons of them, trust me. And, doing a simple search on risque cosplay costumes brought up porn stuff in YouTube for me. So I'm cautioning you as a parent or a grandparent about that too. I want to tell you about the fact that there are cosplay competitions at these conventions oftentimes, and people will go to extreme lengths on their costumes. I personally, because I have an interest in that creative side that other people bring, like Josh with the video editing and all that. I don't have those skills, but I love the fact that people spend a lot of time on these costumes. They're fantastic to look at, and you can tell a lot of work went into them. Again, there's the dark side, but there's also the fun side. There's also sites on Instagram and other social media sites dedicated to cosplay too. They have web pages dedicated to it. It's a huge industry, I'm just telling you. And again, the draw for it comes from just wanting to dress up. It's like Halloween throughout the year, different conventions that people go to, and it can be fun. And what young person wouldn't be drawn to that? I think, even, I don't know, back in the day, I was still going trick-or-treating at 16, 17 years old, mostly just to hang out with my friends. But, we dressed up in costumes still. They weren't the little, kid costumes. We dressed up, and it's just fun to do that with friends sometimes, and it can be very innocent. It's also a way, in what I've read in the threads and things that I follow, I think a lot of people that do this or enter into this, they love the fact that it showcases them in a whole different way. So perhaps there's somebody that doesn't have a lot of social skills or introverted, but they put the costume on and they feel like a whole different person. We remember that when we were kids with Halloween. You felt like a superhero when you dressed like a superhero. And I feel like they are drawn to that because, again, it's giving them strengths they didn't have before. It's letting them exercise a different personality trait than they do in normal life. And let's face it, we have a toxic culture in regards to faith-based filters that we look through. We have a toxic culture. It's not godly at all. We have a lot of stuff going on that's not so good. And one of the findings is that young people do want to escape. They're drawn to the fantasy because they want to escape the reality. I don't blame them. Things are so confusing for the kids nowadays, for our youth. Everything's confusing. It doesn't seem like we have any standards. Everything's about your personal truth, which, by the way, there's only one truth, and that's God's word, what God says. But nowadays, it's all about your personal truth. You Well, the Church of Satan says, do as thou wilt, right? That's their whole mantra. Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Well, and we talked about this last time. What if what you want to do or what you do hurts somebody? It could hurt them emotionally. You don't always know that at the time. You don't always recognize that. So how can you say it's okay to do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt somebody, which is what they stand for, when you don't know if you're always hurting somebody or not? Another reason they're drawn to this is because of the community of other people that have the same interests. They may not have a lot of friends. And so this community, this subculture allows them to meet people with like interests to them that they can talk to, interact with. A lot of kids nowadays are always online interacting with people, and there's not a lot of in-person stuff. Well, guess what? These conventions allow them the ability to interact personally and in person with people. So does the cosplay part. So if they're in local groups, I know there's local groups around Indianapolis that do cosplay. And so it gets them in tune and in contact with people that are like them and share their interests. So again, what's wrong with it? We've talked about a lot of the positive things, but I said this before, I'm going to keep saying this. It's rarely the what, it's the how that we have to look at. So interaction with others, community, making friends, that's a what. That's like, it's hard to argue there's anything wrong with that until you look at the how, right? We're going to watch a video in a little bit that I'll caution you about. This is a adults only show. I'm going to say that now. I probably should have said that at the beginning. I am going to show you a video in a little bit that can explain why the how matters, especially when it comes to cosplay and conventions. They can be predatory. The conventions can be predatory. There's sex trafficking that goes on, that comes out of them, sex traffickers that go to them. There's also situations where I personally have seen so many stories where people in the LGBTQ plus community prey on these kids. Okay, they go after them, especially because a lot of the kids, like I mentioned before, that are into this are socially awkward, or they don't have a lot of friends to begin with. So they're open to that. They're like wide open to that. So it can be very predatory from not just sex trafficking aspect, but also from the LGBTQ recruitment process. And I don't care what you think. Some people think people are born that way or whatever. There are plenty of stories of people who came out as lesbian or gay later in life. Okay, so they've been influenced into it. And I still think even kids are influenced into it. And here's my point on that. If you believe they're born that way, I'm going to push back and say I don't know any babies who are sexual. That is a lie from the enemy. They don't come out sexual. And being gay or lesbian is all about the sex. Otherwise, it'd just be a best friend. I mean, there's no difference. I have best friends and I don't have sex with them, okay? There's no difference between a best friend and a lesbian or gay relationship except for the sex part, the sexual activity. That can be, kissing, smooching, whatever. The physical activity is what sets it apart from being a best friend. Babies don't come out that way. They don't come out thinking that way. I'm just saying. Okay. What else is wrong with it? Again, we talked about the introduction to the darker themes. You saw some of that. You saw plenty of it in the anime and manga that we talked about in the last podcast. Now you're seeing it in regard to the cosplay and conventions. And then it can also lead to gender mixing. And what do I mean by that? A lot of people who have a tendency to be confused about gender or want to explore the other gender will use these conventions and cosplay to do that. Just like in video games, they'll pick an avatar that's the opposite sex just because they're intrigued by it. Okay, so that's what I mean, mixing the genders. Let's talk numbers. Slide 7. The global cosplay clothing market is expected to hold value worth $4.788.2 million, which is $4 billion, in 2023. I want you to look at these numbers, how much money is involved in this. Over $4.5 billion, and it's expected to almost double by 2033. It's very popular in the youth. Very, very popular. And you don't always know the buzzwords, right? So people don't necessarily pick up on it unless you are familiar with it, which is the point of this podcast. Okay, let's look at slide 8. This is the regional market comparison, and you can see here that the United States, it's way more popular. This is cosplay, way more popular in the U.S. than any other country. Significantly. So we're at 28% of the global market share in the cosplay space. This includes buying the costumes, going to the conventions. It's all included in those numbers. And that's according to futuremarketinsights.com. There will be a link in the bottom for you to go look that up in detail if you want to dig into that more. Let's look at slide 9. This is a list of conventions in 2023. This is just a partial list because it goes on and on and on. And this will show you what country they're in, what they're called, and the attendance, the last known attendance. And then the last column shows you the peak number of attendance that they have on record for those particular conventions. There are so many of them. So you can see here there's line 29, Indie FurCon, 28, Furry Siesta, 27, Furry Migration, 32, Fur L, 34, PawCon, 37, Fur Mit. Those are all furry type of conventions. You see down towards the bottom, line 47, Furry Tea Party, 49, Furlandia, 51, Stratos Fur, 54, Fursonicon. So the conventions and the furries go hand in hand along with the cosplay because furry costumes are cosplay, right? So that's why we're linking all this together. And that list is according to wikifur.com. So those attendance records in Gen Con in Indianapolis, the 2023 attendance broke a record with over 70,000 attendees. FurryCon in Atlanta had over 10,000 attendees in 2023. Comiccon in New York had over 200,000 attendees in 2023. There's so many more. And in fact, there's Comic Cons in different cities and different states throughout the year. So that's just one of them. I want to demonstrate to you how big this industry is and how many people are actually participating in it. And it's a growing number. I think you saw before, it's expected to double in cosplay by 2033. I would say probably sooner because it's like a catching kind of thing. It's a cool kind of thing, pop culture. Let's go to slide 10. This is another just link to show you that they're linking the LGBTQ plus agenda with these cons, and they're embracing them. And one thing that they're saying, this one even points out that they have a whole LGBTQ community, and they embrace it. They're a loving, safe space in the Comic-Con world, it states in there. And we're proud to feature DC local and national members of the LGBTQ plus community in an awesome and geeky way. So there is an embracing going on in this subculture with that whole LGBTQ plus agenda, and it's almost like it crosses over into it. So it's one thing that the LGBTQ plus community is attracted to too, especially the youth. because of the welcoming, embracing kind of format. Let's go to slide 11. So this is from watermarkonline.com, and the article is cosplayers find community safe space at comic-cons. And really, I just want to point out that last sentence. More than that, these comic-cons are LGBTQ safe spaces. I'm telling you, there's a massive increase in trying to bring in the LGBTQ plus agenda into the conventions. I know for a fact. That's been going on for a little while, obviously, but it's growing. The next slide, slide 12, is John Baptiste, who says the increasing popularity of these events is mainly due to cons moving from being catered by fans to being catered to fans. And that especially includes those who identify as LGBTQ. And then that last sentence in that slide is the most concerning to me. And why is that? Because we've talked about the communist goals. We've talked about the world agendas towards demoralizing our societies, right? Part of that is desensitizing people to it, normalizing it. But look at what that says. The more you see representation, the more we normalize it, and the more it's okay. And that says it all in a nutshell. Why is there such a push? Because they want it normalized. Why do they want it normalized? Because it's a communist goal agenda. Think about it. If the climate change people are saying we're overpopulated, what's one technique you can do as a global entity to reduce population? And I'm telling you, the climate change people are all about we're overpopulated. Bill Gates has said it. The WEF members have said it. They want population reduced. One way to do that is, number one, gays and lesbians cannot have children naturally. Can they adopt? Yeah. They cannot have them naturally with each other. Okay, so there's in vitro they can use, they can adopt, whatever. But they can't reproduce together. All right? If they're trans, they're never going to be able to reproduce regardless. They're not going to be able to have kids. They're not going to be able to use IVF. They're not going to be able to do any of that. The only option they have is to adopt or get a surrogate. So naturally, the populations will decrease the more these people are prevalent in society, the more they can coach people into it or influence them into it. That's one of the major things behind it, I think, having done the research I've done. And I think if you've watched the podcast so far, I can demonstrate that. It only makes sense. Let's go to slide 13. This basically states the component of these events that lend themselves to be safe spaces is the art of cosplay. Cosplayers are people of all orientations, sizes, and gender identities who dress up as their favorite pop culture and media characters. And with more queer identifying characters entering the media circuit, you see more queer characters being cosplayed at the cons. So, again, they're telling us that. And this particular group, they're playing characters from a GLAAD Award nominated comic book series. Now, GLAAD is obviously Gay and Lesbian Alliance. We even have GLAAD stepping in and issuing awards for comic books. And then people will search out those based on their affinity for the LGBTQ plus or transgender movement. Let's go to slide 14. This is interesting because until I read this, was not aware. And forgive me, I might be a little behind the times. I told you I like superhero stuff, but I don't know a lot about, I don't know any of the backstory to them. I just watched the movies. So I didn't know that Poison Ivy and Batwoman are queer. But here it states, the comic itself features canon queer DC characters like Poison Ivy and Kate Kane, aka Batwoman. Now, all of this content I've shown you in the last 3 slides is all from the same article. So it's that Glad comic book that they were talking about. And so I found that to be interesting. I had no idea. Unless they put it in the movie, I'm not going to know because I don't read comic books and I'm not into anime or manga myself. I just know people who are and have been for a very long time. And I do my homework. Let's go to slide 15. This is just to demonstrate to you that these conventions are actually happening not just at big event centers or convention centers, but they're actually happening on campuses of colleges and universities as well. And this is just one at Western Washington University. I didn't clip this part. I didn't clip the whole front page, but it did mention it's an open event for all ages. So hurry up and rush out and take your kids to the QueerCon. It'll be a blast. Okay, so let's talk about furries. This is a weird topic. I first heard about furries in the early 1990s, and here's a confession time for me. I wasn't living like I should back then fully, but there used to be a show on HBO called Real Sex, and one of the episodes was about furries, and it was about sex between people that wore animal costumes. That's the first I ever heard of it, and that was in the early 1990s, like I said. Next thing I know, like within the last 10 years, I think, if not less, all of a sudden I'm hearing kids being referred to as furries. And I thought, what the heck? Because it was a sexual thing. Now, fast forward, it has become pretty popular in our society. I'm going to tell you there's different levels of it, okay? So go to Five Below, the store Five Below. In the headphones section, they always have the cat headphones sets. They have cat ears on top. All right. Is that a furry? It could be. It could be for furries. It's a piece of accessory that a furry might use. If you wear the cat headphones, are you a furry? No. But I'm just telling you that because it has infiltrated our society. And so now you can buy the cat ear headphones, which is just, remember how we talked about you plant seeds with kids and then whatever they're exposed to can turn into thoughts, and those thoughts can turn into actions once they're entertained. It's very important to make sure that your kids are guarded, their minds are guarded. But by overexposing kids to these kind of things out in society, it's just desensitizing them to it, which could also plant seeds, right, that they might entertain and they might become interested in it. Kids at church wear the headphones with the cat ears, or kids at school wear the headphones with the cat ears, sorry. It's kind of like a gateway kind of thing in society. And every door you go through in the hallway is a little more extreme, right? So you go through the first door and it's cat ear headphones. Not a big deal. But then you progress to the second door, and maybe now they want a tail and claws or something. And so it's just this progression that can take place. Will it always take place like that? No. I'm not trying to say any absolutes. I'm talking about this on a macro level, just giving you the info to watch for. I did a search on YouTube to try to find a clip from that Real Sex show. Instead, porn videos came up, and there's actually a Barney sex tape. You know, Barney, the purple dinosaur. There's porn with people dressed as furries. There's porn animations that came up. So another thing is, like, if your child opens one accidentally, like they're looking at furry stuff and it's mixed in with all this sexual content, for example, if they accidentally open one up and they hurry up and close it, guess what? It's going to show up in the feed. More of that kind of content is going to show up in the feed in YouTube. So be careful with that. I want to now move to a video, and there's two schools of thought on this. So let me set this up. You might have seen this. I know other podcasters were talking about it, but there's a school in Utah, middle school, called Nebo Middle School. And the kids they organized themselves a walkout. And there were a lot of kids that did a walkout. And what they were protesting against was furries in the school. And I watched a really long video of kind of a journalist that I think he was there for like an hour and a half. So I watched him interview all these different kids, and obviously I can't play it on here. It's too long. So I just have a clip to play about it. The kids were reporting being bitten, scratched. These furries come up and lick other students. Basically, they're assaulting other kids. Okay. So the kids are sick of it. One of the kids that was being interviewed held their arm up and they're like, I have scratches on my arm from this kid that crawls around and acts like a cat. And they just wanted it to stop. They were so sick of it. And the parents helped them organize it. Plus, they put a petition out on change.org to send to the school. The petition has over 3,000 signatures. Once the local news did an interview with the kids, now the school administration has come out and saying that doesn't happen at our school. It's fake. They made it up. So you're going to tell me that the kids went to the extent of organizing a walkout. The parents supported them and helped them organize it. The parents helped put together a petition to get it to stop, but it's fake. And one of the kids in the video that I watched, the really long one, the journalist asked him, why do you think the principal supports this? Because the principal clearly supports this. And several kids yelled out, because her daughter's one. So the principal's daughter's a furry. And so the principal doesn't want to restrict furries at all. So let's watch this clip really quick.
School studies. Recently, some students at Mount Nebo Middle School in Payson, Utah, walked out of class stating they had had enough. The furries were making it difficult for them to walk down the school hallways without being molested.
They either bite us, they scratch us, they bark at us, they pounce on us, and then they run on all fours and pounce on people.
Nebo School District spokesman Seth Sorensen insists that rumors are causing concern among students.
Actually is not something that's been occurring. In fact, a lot of the information that's been put out there is completely incorrect and inaccurate.
However, the students say it is happening, and some parents encourage their kids to act like animals because they believe it's healthy for them to role play and use their imagination. Folks, this is beyond imagination. This is crazy. And we wonder why test scores have declined and this country faces a shortage of about 55,000 full-time teachers. It's time for schools that allow this to happen to crack down against the furries. Humans are not animals. But what do we expect to happen when adults tell children to be whatever gender they feel like being on a given day? And now whatever animal they want to be. See the progression here? Let's remember that God made us in His image. Male and female He made us for His purposes.
Amen
we
to
are
that.
a reflection of a divine creator, not the animals that He gave us the authority to rule over. It's time to get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic, not eating kibbles and using litter boxes.
Thanks, Josh. So a few things about that video that we watched. He said something about kids molesting other kids and all. I think that's a little strong of a term. I don't know that's the accurate term to use, but maybe they do feel that way. The other thing is that I want to elaborate on is the school actually has a policy in place. And what it states is it restricts anything that draws undue attention, distracts, disrupts, or interferes with the learning atmosphere at school. So the change.org petition is stating that they want the school to enforce that. And furries are just part of that, right? So that's what the change.org petition is about. The school already has a policy against it. The other thing is they had a school spokesman come out, right? And he said, it's all rumors. It's not true. Do you expect the school to admit it? Do you expect them to come on camera and say, oh yeah, it's true. We do have kids that are biting and licking other kids and scratching them, but we're going to fix it or we're going to work on it. Don't be naive. They're not going to do that. We've had this situation in Indiana in particular, first person accounts of people telling me when I was with a parent group doing events who come up afterwards, tell me stories about the litter boxes in the classrooms. The critics are saying that's not true. There's no litter boxes in the classrooms, da-da-da-da-da. Well, number one, that's based on the fact that the first story that broke in the news was either out of Michigan or Minnesota, I can't remember, but the first report of the litter box in the classroom was proven to be a hoax. That doesn't mean there are none still in any classrooms. I have a contact who he goes to my church. He was a librarian in a middle school in a local township. And he told me straight up, he had a kid that came in who crawled on all fours and meowed and wore a tail and wore the ears. And he was not allowed to make her get up off the floor or tell her to do anything different. In fact, the school had him call someone in the office when she came to the library so that they could come and escort her around so that she would be protected. It's so backwards to me. I had another family come up to me from a township that's south of here, and they told me that their daughter, who was 17, she was a senior, she came home and told them there was a litter box in the art room. And I'm going to give you some advice. Look at the art rooms, look at the art teachers and the liberal arts teachers, because they seem to be the ones that embrace this and push it way over the line. They go full steam ahead with all of it. They love it. So watch your art classes. But anyways, they had a litter box in the classroom in the art class. And she came home, the daughter came home and told her parents about it, and the parents called the school. Well, she had missed a week or two of school because of COVID her senior year. And so as punishment, because the parents were telling other parents and causing a stir about it, as punishment, the school said, well, your daughter missed 2 weeks of school, so she can't graduate. She's going to have to graduate late. She's going to have to take extra classes and stuff. But when word got out and everybody started making a stink, guess what the school did? They came back and said, we changed our minds. We're going to graduate your daughter early. Do you know why that is? To get the parents and the kid out of the school. Now, we have so many reports of that in Indiana. I keep telling people, I need pictures, I need videos, I need evidence, because nobody is believing us that we have people reporting this. No one is. No one's believing it. If you have that situation with your kids in school, make sure, I know they're not supposed to take phones to school, but let's be honest, they do. Every phone a kid has pretty much has a camera. Take pictures, take videos, report it. Send it to revolverbroadcasting.com. Definitely email us and we'll report on that. Slide 16. This is from a furry fandom website. It's a recommendation to people who are interested in furrydom. So I pulled this up and here's what it says. Participate in online furry groups and discussion boards. And I mentioned that earlier. The online stuff for your kids, the phones and all that, if you're not paying attention and you're not monitoring it closely, this stuff is so easily available to them and influences them. So please be vigilant. This article says, since the furry fandom is a global one, most furry activity happens on the internet. Try the mobile app Furry Amino or websites like So Furry and Fur Affinity. Create an account and start commenting, posting, and connecting with other users. Or hop into the furry community on Reddit. r/furry is a very active subreddit, and it's easy to get involved in discussions there. You can easily find other furries via Tumblr and DeviantArt too. Then it has the bullet points. Look for furry Discord servers, Skype groups, and Telegram groups for instant messaging. I'm giving you all the ammo, folks. Look for these apps. I'm giving them to you. I'm handing them to you on a silver platter. The next bullet, search through furry pages and tags on a regular social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You'll quickly find your community there. And then the third bullet point, the furry community is a place where all kinds of people can really fit in, especially those who don't often feel like they fit in. And again, that's the draw, isn't it? Of course, I want everybody to feel like they fit in. I don't advocate for being unkind to anyone, regardless of their beliefs. I really don't do that, and I won't do it in my personal life. There is a difference between macro beliefs, meaning your worldview, your value system, and all of that, and micro, the way you treat people who believe differently. Okay? There's a difference between those two things. When I'm speaking on these podcasts, I'm talking macro level. I'm talking generally. This is my view. This is my opinion. This is what you need to know. I would not treat people unkind who fit into those categories ever. I have seen it happen, and my Xena warrior princess insides want to come out swinging. I can't stand it. I want to take up for them because you should never be unkind to somebody just because of that, because they're a furry or because they they like anime and manga or because they go to conventions. That's never okay. Or because they're on the LGBTQ plus spectrum. We're not called to be unkind to them. All right. So keep that in mind. But they really target the kids who are misfits. And if you watch the last episode, you know there's a direct link between kids who are drawn to this subculture and people who are on the autism spectrum disorders list that fall into those autism spectrums. It could be autism, Asperger's, ADD, ADHD. Those types of kids are absolutely drawn to this. They like being children. I've also seen on Reddit subreddits for detrans, for trans, and all that kind of stuff, where they want to go back to a time before they transitioned, especially with the detrans. They didn't understand at the time that puberty was affecting the way they felt about themselves. And so they went down the path of transgender, and then they decided years later that that wasn't what they should have done. And there's so much regret around that. But they are drawn to this type of stuff because it reminds them of when they were a kid before all of that. I mean, that could be a factor. So always be kind to people because you don't know where they're coming from and what their draw is. And understand that there are reasons why our youth particularly are drawn to this, and even young adults. Like I know millennials who are into this, and I think it's just because of the things I said earlier. Our world is poisoned right now. It's so sick, and they're looking for some escape. So here's a video that I'm going to have Josh kick off. It's kind of a long one, so I'm going to be interjecting here and there. But this one is a first-person account of a girl who went to a convention, and she meets a man there, and he ends up abusing her. So with that, let's roll.
Most kids are nerds no matter what, deep down. Nerds over sports, TV shows, and everything in between. For me, it was cartoons and Japanese animations. I was in love with everything art and cartoon related. I even drew my own comics and dabbled in cosplay. Through this hobby, I met a lot of online friends. Young, old, male, female, you name it. Then I met him. The man who would steal my childhood and destroy my mental state for...
Yeah, so a couple things about that part. I had said before, anime and manga can be a gateway. Kids get interested in that, and it always seems to progress. Start with Pokemon, go to Digimon, go to Yu-Gi-Oh, and then you enter into this realm of different ones that you don't even know what they are. But they're not good. So that's something that I wanted to point out here because that was an introduction for her into cosplay. migrated into cosplay in the conventions. Let's go with the next part.
Years to come. A friend of mine approached me with 2 tickets to my very first anime convention, and boy was I ecstatic to go. I had always wanted to attend a convention. It's like Halloween, but with cool cartoons and lots of artwork. I spent most of the weeks approaching the day practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Little did I know how much this day would haunt me in the future.
Mm-hmm. So you caught that she said it was like Halloween, right? And again, who doesn't like to dress up at Halloween? We do it still as adults for the kids in the neighborhood. And my husband likes to scare them because he has a really scary costume. But the other thing is, she says, you know, this guy's robbing her. He robbed her of her childhood, and it's going to haunt her for the rest of her life. And I want you to file that away as you watch this continuation of this video, because it goes back to the seeds being planted, and then they can end up taking form and producing fruit in actions. One thing that I think we need to remember is we can forgive people, but we can never forget things. Only God can forget. And so these memories are going to haunt you for a long time. Let's go with the next section.
Most of the day was pretty uneventful. Just pictures, panels, foods, whatever. But this was when I was introduced to a man who we'll call Frank. He was a quirky guy dressed as a feline anime villain. And wow, was he the most beautiful person on the planet. A girl who I had been hanging out with for some time took me to introduce us, and we hit it off instantly. We traded numbers, and I left feeling like I was on cloud 9. After all, an older guy had finally noticed me. I must have been so cool for him to even look my way.
Several things on this. He's an older guy. Remember I said these can be predatory. They are often. Older guy dressed as a female feline, which is a little part of what we were saying earlier. Sometimes people like to dress up in the costumes that are the opposite gender that they have as experimental, or just they're intrigued by it. She's looking at him as a man interested in her, that she's never had that before. And so this is a new experience for her. And young girls do look for that. They do. They want that attention. So initially it was attention that grabbed her, and the fact that he was dressed as a female feline character. Let's go. More.
We started texting, and this is where things started to turn sour. It started off innocently, but little things began happening over time. He would encourage me to do all sorts of strange things, like dress up in animal costumes with him, where he would proceed to tell me how cute and adorable I looked in those outfits. Not that that was already weird, he then started telling me to do all sorts of strange things in them, even when they hurt. It felt so wrong, but the attention he gave me when I did what he said drew me in. I finally felt wanted by someone.
So he starts off by flattering her, and then it progresses slowly to control and darkness. He breaks down her boundaries little by little, and guess who else? What other types of people do that? Sex traffickers. One of the first things they'll do when they capture kids, in particular for child trafficking, is show them pornography and get them slowly exposed to that kind of content to break down their boundaries and their barriers. Studies have shown that kids are naturally embarrassed when they're shown pornography. They don't want anything to do with it. But by continuing to expose them to it, what happens? The seeds get planted, right? Then they get entertained, and before long, it becomes action. Sex traffickers know this. So this is similar to that. So just keep that in mind. Let's go with some more.
By him. We began having phone calls and video calls all the time. The thrill and excitement I got from his attention slowly turned into an obsession. I felt like I needed his validation, but he never seemed satisfied. Things only began to escalate the more I would give in to his demands. Eventually, he gave me rules.
Rules, huh? Do you see the control that he's exerting over her? And it's little by little. And notice her weakness. She's weak because she wants the attention. Let's go some more.
He would demand I put on my costume before speaking to my master, with outlandish tasks like lick yourself clean or go sit in the corner until you behave. I would sometimes sit there for hours until I could no longer feel my legs, but somehow I would always just listen because I didn't want to disappoint him. I really didn't want to listen to him anymore. I didn't want to let him control what I did. Eventually, I began answering his calls less and less, and I think he could tell because he started to retaliate. Things just got worse from there. He began venting to me, which turned into miserable rants, saying he'd harm himself if I ever left him. I became so frightened of what he would do that I couldn't go on without him and harm myself too.
So he was so charming until he wasn't, right? And the other thing I'm noticing through this is he's taking advantage of his age, and even though he's not an authority over her in any way, shape, or form, she feels like he is. So he's taking advantage of that with her. That's also how predators act. I hate to go here, but you have to think in terms of he could be a teacher. He could be a staff administrator. He could be a church leader. He could be anyone who has interaction with your child as an older person, because they look up to the older people as authorities. Let's go with some more.
But he encouraged this behavior and little by little began to dominate my thoughts, telling me I was nothing without him because he was my master and he knew best.
Master knows best. He's putting himself in a position of authority, even though, like we said, he's not technically in any shape of authority with her. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye on your kids in regards to this, because it's a perception from the kids, okay? They may not verbalize it. You may not notice it, but she's telling you in this video that that's how she felt. He was an older person. He's basically her authority. And so she's doing everything he wants. Why? For the attention. It changes, though, to where she's doing everything he wants because she's scared. And that's a problem. Let's go with some more.
Despite all this, all I could think about was when I would get to text him again, when I would get my next fix. My grades had fallen and I had lost control of my own thoughts and what was best for me. He would say predatory, provocative things to me that make me too nauseous to even repeat. He'd buy me dirty videos and describe them to me in full detail, telling me what he wanted to do to me and my outfits.
And this is where he introduces her to porn. And he's starting to desensitize her to those things that he wants to eventually do with her. Let's go some more.
And I ate it all up. I felt older, mature. For the first time, I felt like an adult that was loved and wanted.
I don't even know if I need to comment on that, but I'm going to step in and say keywords here. I felt mature. I felt like an adult. I felt loved and wanted. So many young girls are in a position of wanting that. And there are nefarious people out there who are going to take advantage of it. Let's go to the next part.
One day, we had finally planned to meet in person, and I was ecstatic. He took me to a hotel room where we were going to stay with another friend. We were supposed to all go to a college party together, but instead, Frank insisted we stay in together. As soon as his friend left, he plopped a bag on the bed and demanded I open it. I was horrified to pull out what seemed like a cat outfit. It had ears, a tail, the whole spiel. "Put it on," he said, grinning. I was beginning to get worried, but still, I obliged. It only got worse from there. My heart was pounding, and I didn't know what he wanted to do with me in this ridiculous outfit. Before I knew it, he pulled out a collar and shackles. He slammed my hands to the edge of the bed and began clamping it so tightly it hurt. Ouch! I don't want this anymore, I pleaded. Stay right there and be a good girl. I'm going to go get some tools in my car, he said so smugly.
Yeah. I want you to imagine, if you're seeing the visual, this is like an illustrated cartoon if you're listening on audio, but I want you to imagine that being your daughter, your granddaughter, your niece, in this situation. And think about how you would handle it. What would you do? Do you even know? In this scenario, her parents don't know. They think she's out with a friend, right? So, scary times, folks. Let's go with the next part.
Tools? I was not ready to find out what those were needed for. I was so terrified and didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I had to get out. The second he walked out of the room, I sprung straight into action. I started biting at the shackles wrapped around my wrists as hard as possible, anything to get one piece loose. To my luck, it started to move and buckle open, and I was able to break free. I didn't even care to grab any of my things and ran straight for the door, tripping on everything in sight. I didn't even take the lift and instead sprinted down the stairs, barely catching a step as I rushed to the bottom floor and out through the back exit of the hotel. I ran for what seemed like an eternity until I finally arrived at my house.
So when I was watching this, one thing that really occurred to me, that I think we as a society keep expecting our kids to be adults. We keep treating them like they should be behaving like adults. We forget that they need our guidance as parents and grandparents and older relatives to guide them and people who influence their lives. We are responsible for that. We cannot keep treating our kids like they should just know what to do. In this particular situation, she's voicing the fact that she doesn't know what to do over and over again. She's making good decisions now, that she knows what's going on. But parents got to step up, especially if your parents of faith. Maybe you're listening and you're not. A lot of my podcasts are going to deal with Bible verses. I'm showing you where the Bible talks about these things. But maybe you're not a person of faith and you're watching. You still have an ultimate accountability and responsibility to your kids. So just put the guardrails on. That's all I'm saying. Let's go finish this out.
Until I finally arrived at my house. Once I got to the door, I could barely insert my keys into the keyhole as my arms were shaking uncontrollably. Once I got the door open, I stumbled up the stairs all the way into my bedroom. And then I broke down crying. I sobbed until I could no longer shed any more tears and just sat there. I saw my phone light up. He had blown me up with a bunch of angry messages and tried calling me over 30 times. I didn't want to pick up, but I was so scared of him, of my master. So I picked up. How dare you embarrass me? You made a fool of me today, and you didn't listen to my demands. Get back here right now, or you're going to regret ever leaving me after what I'm going to do to you. I pleaded and pleaded for him to forgive me, but he just wasn't having it, so I grew very, very scared of him. I didn't know what he'd do to me, or even my family for that matter. He knew where I lived, and I didn't know where else I could run and hide. I felt so lost and helpless until I finally caved and told my parents what was going on.
Notice that she says a year of deconditioning coming up. We haven't got there yet, but I want you to catch that coming up because she's gone through all this trauma. At this point, she finally realizes she should run to her parents and talk to them. And so what would you do if your daughter came to you in this situation? What would you do? I want you to give that some thought because it's very possible nowadays. It's very plausible nowadays. I told you that these conventions can be very predatory. They're looking for girls just like her, and this is heartbreaking. I know it's an illustrated, video, but still, if you're listening to the story behind the scenes, it can be heartbreaking. Let's go ahead and move forward with the video.
I ran into their room, crying my heart out, and explained the entire situation to them. I didn't want to tell them sooner in fear that they would cut off all my communication with him. It really didn't occur to me how much I had become his puppet until the moment I needed my parents. I didn't expect my parents to be so supportive and relieved that I had told them rather than keep it a secret. So we worked together and called the police and filed a restraining order against Frank so that he could never come near me again. It was like an extremely heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders.
I want you to think about this. It takes a year of deconditioning. She should have felt free all along, but the predator destroyed that for a while. But thankfully, she had parents she could run to. She finally realized that's what she should do. She was eventually able to progress past the situation, but she goes on to say she still has the desire to contact him sometimes. Again, seeds turn into plants, they turn into thoughts, and then they turn into flowers or actions, right? Those seeds that get planted, that stuff never goes away. It never goes away, especially if if the kids are entertaining those thoughts, if they're researching stuff, if they're reading about it, if they're just intrigued by it. That stuff is sitting there growing, right? It never goes away once that happens. Once it takes root, it doesn't. So again, we really need to guard our children. I don't want to go forward anymore, Josh. We're going to move on. Thank you. So I said this in the last episode. I'm going to say it again. This subculture I compare to a cult. And why do I do that? Let's look at some of the characteristics of cults. Number one, cults often seek out those who are lonely or feel different. So do people at conventions and in this subculture. It can be predatory. Back in the 60s, there were the what were they called? The flower children, the Moonies. That's what they would always look for. Even Charles Manson, you can look at that story. He was always looking for kids that didn't fit in or that didn't feel like grounded or stable. That's what they do here. Number two, cults isolate people from their friends and family and are intent on becoming a new family. So do these. They will tell you, again, especially if you're indicating you're on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, they will tell you, we'll accept you. You don't have to worry about it. We'll be your family. We'll accept you. And they take people in with that. They entice them. Number three, cults entice with a positive message, excluding any type of risks. And so do these. You notice when they promote these things, if you're looking at the websites, if you're looking at the threads, if you're looking at the subreddits or anything like that about this topic, these topics, the cosplay, the conventions, the furries, they always promote such a positive message about it. They don't ever tell you the risks or the pitfalls. They're great at sales and marketing, but they're not real. They're not real with people. So to me, that's like a cult. And then number four, cults reject and even torment those who leave. That's a key attribute of a true cult. I'm not talking religious cult. I'm talking about a cult where it's just something that's false that you're a member of or whatever. But it can be mostly religious. Anyways, if you look at religious cults, for example, when people leave, they call them suppressive persons or they cut off all ties with them. I was married to a Jehovah's Witness. I was not one, but I was married to one, and his parents were not allowed to have a meal with us. We could go over and visit for like 10 minutes at a time. We could talk to them in person, but they weren't allowed to call us. They weren't allowed to take our calls. They couldn't spend more than that with us, and they could never have a meal with us because my ex left their religion. Cults do that. And one thing that I can compare this to is the D-trans subreddit threads. They complain all the time, these people. It's heartbreaking because they talk about how the trans community boots them out. They kick them out. If they decide to be trans, they're just on their own. Even physicians don't follow them to make sure they're okay. Even their medical doctors or specialists don't follow up with them to make sure they're okay. They just kind of drop off the face of the earth. It's really sad. I've got 2 more small videos to play. I need to wrap this up, but listen to this. This is Erin Friday. She's being interviewed. Well, she's given a speech for GenSpect, and I highly recommend, you can find their channel on YouTube. GenSpect is really good if you have any interest in researching about LGBTQ plus or transgender movement in particular. Erin was a lifelong Democrat, and she now co-leads the Western region of Our Duty, which is an international group of parents and allies who fight against gender ideology and to protect children. And she also has a local branch of parents fighting rapid onset gender dysphoria in kids. She's also an author. So we're going to play a couple of clips back to back. One's really short. The next one is also short. So let's go with that. Listen to Erin.
My daughter was pre-prime. She was into anime and cosplay because you could escape reality. It was a fantasy world that she was living in.
Mm-hmm.
She met an older teen at an anime convention who went by they, them. This influencer was hip and she was cool. She was also sexually assaulted as she was a child. When she was a child. She was into hard drugs and mentally unwell. Suicidality and self-harm were her friends. She would even find strangers in the park. She was only 16. Her sorcery entrapped my daughter and many other young girls that followed her on TikTok and Instagram as she did mushrooms and LSD and wore Superman costumes stuffed with Packers. This older influencer taught the young girls to dissociate with their bodies and use the internet to sell sexual pictures to sugar daddies. Because after all, they were going to remove those breasts anyway. So why not earn some cash from them and save it up so you can remove them later?
It's really sad to me. She talks about how her daughter ended up transitioning, and I believe she was able to get her daughter out of it, if I recall correctly. Now she's on a mission, similar to me, to warn people about these things. And again, that's first person accounting. So in closing, I could have pulled so much more information. There's so much to research, and I could share so much, but of course there isn't enough time. But I will say we're behind on studying the impact of these things on our children. You know, I was in the pharmaceutical industry, and I talked about this before, the actual different phases of a pharmaceutical trial. And it takes years. Like once something's approved, they'll do a phase 4 study, which is the long-term study, observational studies, to determine long-term effects after it's approved. That's similar to what's going on now, but we haven't hit that where anybody's committed to do a long-term study on any of this. Some small studies are starting, but you know, we have to be more active with that and really wait and pay attention to what comes out of the data, because so much has already come out. It's just there's not actual studies about this, but I guarantee the psychological impact of this stuff on kids can be detrimental. I want to warn against that, because when kids want to go into a fantasy world, and we see this with VR is also prevalent. When kids want to escape to a fantasy world and it becomes too much, like they're doing it way too often, way too many hours spent on it, there's something else going on that we need to be checking on with our kids. Warning on that. There's a YouTube channel I want to highly recommend. Again, it's GenSpect, and they have great content on particularly gender dysphoria issues, transgenderism. Definitely go and check them out. Not a sponsor of ours. I'm not getting paid for it. That's just my personal opinion. And again, not all of this stuff is bad, but you have to think about what you're willing to risk when it comes to your kids. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for watching. And if you like the content, please like, share, subscribe, follow, and comment, because all of those activities push it up in the algorithm so more people can be reached. I'm not doing that for self-promotion. I'm actually trying to get the information out and give people just resources to go to. You'll find all the references to everything we talked about in the bottom. A special thanks to Revolver Broadcasting for giving me this platform and producing the show. Woohoo, Josh! Thank you so much, my buddy. And make sure you go to revolverbroadcasting.com, because Revolver has a lot of different shows and different types of content to look at. And I think you'll really like it. So with that, I'm going to bid you adieu. Good night.